Hello, and welcome to the Conservative Energy Podcast brought to you by the Conservative Energy Network. My name is Kayla Ventura, and joining me today is CEN Director of External Affairs, Tyler Duvelius. A little bit about me before we start. I serve as the Digital Communications Manager over at the Conservative Energy Network. I joined the network in the middle of 2021. My background is in the consulting and media space. I was brought over to CEN to help solidify and amplify our message, grow our social media presence, and support our state teams through different communications methods. Before we get underway, I wanted to give a quick history for those of you who might not know what the Conservative Energy Network or CEN is all about. In 2016, former Deputy Executive Director of the National Republican Congressional Committee and Republican strategist Mark Pichet recognized the need for conservative leaders to help shape developing energy policies. CEN launched its first state chapter in Mark's home state of Michigan. CEN now covers 24 states with national, state, and local chapters, all with the common mission of promoting clean energy innovation rooted in conservative principles. CEN serves as a nonprofit 501c3 organization, and you can learn more by visiting our website at www.conservativeenergynetwork.org. Joining me today is CEN Director of External Affairs, Tyler Duvelius. Tyler came over to the CEN national team with both campaign and state leadership experience. He served as former executive director in the great state of Ohio at our OSEF chapter and came over to the national team at the beginning of 2021. As Director of External Affairs, Tyler hit the ground running. Last year alone, speaking and participating at over 20 conferences. If you're looking for him, you can typically find him at the airport. Thanks for joining me today, Tyler. I'd love to start by talking about 2023 priorities. So what are the priorities for CEN in this coming new year?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kayla. Excited to be the first guest on the first Conservative Energy podcast. Very, very exciting. Glad that we are launching this. And you are right, you can mostly find me at John Glenn International Airport. So
Yes, one
I've
of the
heard
best airports to fly out of, definitely.
people are saying it's a great airport in the great
Yeah.
state of Ohio. So you asked what our priorities are at CEN, and CEN is, as you mentioned in the intro, there is a large network of conservatives in over 24 states, all serving a common mission of forging a clean energy future rooted in conservative principles. And the great thing about having an organization that is so focused on state and local policies is that so many of our states have different priorities throughout the year. They want to do what's best. What's best for us here in Ohio, where I'm based out of, might not be the same as those priorities in Florida or North Carolina or Texas or Utah. But there's a couple common themes that we see that run across the network. And as Director of External Affairs, that's something that we work to identify in the national team. How can we help pave the way to ensure that clean energy is going in at the state level across the nation? The first and foremost of those really is permitting reform. And that's something I was lucky enough to have talked to some offices on Capitol Hill just last week about. But the fact of the matter is there's a ton of opportunity, a ton of market-driven opportunity for clean energy projects to be sited across the country. And it's something that our Land and Liberty team, and I hope that you get to talking to them on this podcast in the future, but they're working with our local partners to ensure that those projects are succeeding at the local level. But if we can't get the electrons from that project to the end use consumer, whether it be somebody's home or a large business, then it doesn't really matter. And we want to make sure that we can get transmission lines into the ground, that we can get approval for those projects, both on the transmission side and the energy side in a timely manner. What a lot of people don't realize is how many processes these projects have to jump through before they can come to completion. And a lot of that takes place at the federal level, where it can take almost 2 years just to get an environmental review. And so how can we help streamline those processes? How can we identify ways that we can go back on previous reviews that were done to help speed along that process and to help provide more certainty to businesses who want to bring their company and to invest in America, to invest in American jobs, and provide a good paycheck to a lot of people. And so that's something last year at the end of the 117th Congress, the previous Congress, there were sort of two competing bills, right? We heard a lot about Senator Manchin's proposal from West Virginia, and then he's a Democrat on the Republican side, also from West Virginia, Senator Capito. She put forward a bill, and I think there's a lot of appetite from people on both sides of the aisle to find something to get done. And hopefully we can sit down and have a reasonable conversation about what a common sense permitting reform package might look like here in the 118th Congress. Secondly, is the implementation of clean energy. In 2021 and 2022, two historic pieces of legislation were passed. One being the bipartisan infrastructure law, also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which did pass with quite a bit conservative support. It represented over $1 trillion into infrastructure investment across the country. And then, of course, last summer, the Inflation Reduction Act, after a compromise was struck with Senator Manchin, did pass both chambers of Congress, not supported by any Republicans, and it's a lot of money that's getting spent. But it represents historic investment when it comes to clean energy development in this country and clean energy opportunities. So while we might not necessarily agree with how the IRA in particular was passed through Congress, we recognize that there are a lot of local conservative communities that stand to benefit from this. And so we want to work with our state teams. We want to work with state and local elected officials to ensure they have the tools that they need to go apply for just a handful of the over 700 grant opportunities that are coming out of those bills. And we also want to make sure that it's done in a way that's fiscally responsible. We don't want to straddle local communities with obligations where, yes, the federal government will fund it for the first 5 years, but they're on the hook for it in perpetuity. How can we take the investments that are being made and ensure that we're going to maximize the return on that investment for our future generations? Because let's face it, we're sitting here on January 24th talking about debt ceiling and what's going to happen if we can't reach a compromise. If we're racking up this debt, and the national debt is a very serious problem, doesn't necessarily touch on energy, so I won't dive too far into it. But if our children are going to be paying for the legislation that we're producing now, then we ought to make sure that we're establishing the best return that they can get on the investment that we're writing. And then finally, the last of the big priorities, if you will, for CEN is telling the story of conservative support for clean energy. And I'm really glad that we're able to bring this podcast out. Of course, that I'm from Ohio, and I think Mark Twain once famously said that if the world were to end, he's going to go to Cincinnati, Ohio, my hometown, because everything happens last there. So I myself have finally gotten into podcasting over the last few months, and glad to see CEN's bringing one about. But this is going to be a way for us to tell the story, to talk about conservative leaders like Governor Eric Holcomb in Indiana, who he had Republican supermajorities in both chambers in the state house, and they still passed over a dozen clean energy pieces of legislation last year. And that just shows you that all Americans, particularly conservatives, they want to see those innovative approaches to driving a path towards a clean energy future. We're really excited to be launching the Clean Future Academy, which is going to be able to serve as a resource for policymakers, for professionals, for anybody who's interested in learning more about clean energy innovation that's going on. It should really be a one-stop shop to learn about a multitude of the different technologies that America is driving for.
It's really exciting to hear about the Clean Future Academy, and that's a tool that lives on the CEN website.
Yes, absolutely. It's on the CEN website. You'll see, again, all of those different technologies that are out there. And we're going to continue to update it, to continue to share the latest and greatest developments as they come out across the clean energy spectrum.
Wonderful. We'll definitely keep an eye on that. You can find the Clean Future Academy on the CEN website at www.conservativeenergynetwork.org/CFA. And that is live right now. Earlier, you mentioned that last year, historic funding bills passed with hundreds of grant opportunities in the IIJA and the IRA legislation that was passed. What is some of the best way to be able to get connected and bring those dollars home to our audience of states?
Oh boy, there's there's so many out there. You know that there's a large bill when the White House appoints people that have whole teams under them to try to get the information out to their teams. And candidly, I've met with lobbyists before who helped craft these bills, right? And they're still waiting on some of the rulemaking answers to really come out about these provisions to figure out how they're going to get out to the states and municipalities. Really, again, the CEN helps represent 24 different state teams across the country who are working on these issues every day. I think maybe I'll be a little self-serving in saying this, but go talk to one of our state teams out there. They can help find the right resources, and we have teams here at CEN who are working to identify those grant resources that are out there as well. And we don't only want to find the right opportunities because sometimes they can be clean energy related. For example, there's plenty of HEAP funding out there, which deals with energy efficiency that might be in places in state government where you least expect it, like housing development authorities. And so, if you connect with us, we'll be able to point you in the right direction and ensure that you're maximizing the dollars. Because, candidly, you might not agree with how much money is being spent or how the money is being spent, but if you're a policymaker, I can promise you that you probably want that money being spent in your state and not another state. So we're here to help facilitate that.
Absolutely. I love that. Send them right to our state teams. And you can find all of our state teams on our website. Well, thinking about our state chapters and our impact across the nation, and knowing that you are our resident traveler, you're always in that airport. Where can we expect that next CEN state chapter to pop up?
Oh, that's a great question. And it's truly one of my favorite questions. One of the best parts about this job is that I get to meet people all over the country and get to meet policymakers from all over the country. And we have a great roster of states now, and we're seeing so many conservative clean energy champions really start to emerge out of the states we're in. But there's plenty of states out there, and those that you might not expect it, that are really experiencing a shift in how they think about clean energy issues. One of those states is Alabama, where the state of Alabama put in $5 million in their last state budget to deal with EV infrastructure, to deal with electric vehicle charging stations throughout the state. As you might imagine, there are, as in any state, and Ohio's the same way, but there's kind of a corridor of Alabama where a lot of the population lives, but there's some of those more rural areas, and you have to build out electric vehicle transmission and infrastructure in those municipalities. They're going back and wanting to double that investment here in the next session. And again, that is a Republican governor asking Republican supermajorities for that. The Speaker of the House in Alabama is a great clean energy champion. You look at states like Oklahoma, and they're understanding the manufacturing capacity that exists with clean energy. And that's truly something that we see at CEN, right? Not just how can we get the electrons in the ground and how can we get them to consumers and ensure that we have consumer choice and consumer protection through all of that, but how can we re-domesticate that clean energy supply chain so that we're making it here in America? And that's something Governor Stitt and Lieutenant Governor Pennell in Oklahoma, they've really embraced that. And they're wanting to move Oklahoma into a state that is going to help lead the American transition to a clean energy future. So those are two quick states that come to mind, but you also look at other states where you might have maybe more moderate Republicans and not think quite as Republican strongholds, but you look at states in the Northeast where there are actually a number of Republican governors in that area, and how can we work with them to ensure that a conservative voice is being brought to clean energy demands that are being made by a lot of constituents up there.
Seems like there are a lot of great opportunities, even in really Republican strong-held states. Opportunity everywhere.
Absolutely, and this is something where we're seeing more and more voters want to see some action, right? Every year, the Conservative Energy Network does a poll in November, And one of the things that has always surprised me in our last poll, 81% of all voters. So it's 81%. It's more than there are Democrats, and it's more than there are Republicans. But 81% of all voters want to see the government take action to accelerate the development of clean energy. Then you look at the next question that we asked right after that. Well, what's the best way to do that? 72% of all voters want the government to use the market to accelerate that transition. Only 16% want subsidies, quotas, mandates, right? And even fewer percent want to see something like a carbon dividend or a tariff or something like that. And so what that tells me is that Americans want to see their states move forward aggressively with clean energy development. They also want to see their states embrace a free market approach, and that's truly what CEN is working towards.
Thank you for sharing that. And finally, with our last question, I want to get a little personal. What's a personal goal that you have for our clean energy future?
Yeah, great question, Kayla. Thanks for asking it. In this job, I have a unique privilege to go to bed every night thinking that I didn't make the world a worse place to live. And we're almost always taking incremental steps to make it a better place to live. And that makes it just easier to get up the next day and keep doing what we're doing, keep doing what we love. Our mission at CEN is to forge a clean energy future rooted in conservative principles. And personally, for me, I want to ensure that clean energy future is American led because we have a lot of competitors out there in the global sphere. 2 years ago, I had a chance to go to COP26, which is the UN's annual conference of the parties convening to talk about climate change. And it was in Scotland and had a chance to go with the first ever all Republican congressional delegation. And the second all congressional delegation actually went to Sharm el Sheikh for COP27 this year, which is great to see that continuity and to keep it moving along. And when you go to a global convening like that, you recognize that it's not just Americans that like to use power, right? There is a global demand as we move forward in this 21st century to ensure that energy is reaching all corners of the globe. And if America doesn't take the leadership that we need to do it, other countries will. And this might be my political bias coming in, but you did ask personal questions, so I'll show it a little bit.
Mhm.
I would much rather the world be getting its energy and its energy supply chain from America than I would seeing that supply chain come from China or the energy production coming from Iran or Colombia or Russia. When America is being energy dominant, as President Trump pushed our nation to be, as we're energy independent and exporting energy, the world is going to be a much safer place. And we see right now with what's going on in the Russia and the Ukraine that energy is a serious geopolitical weapon, and our adversaries aren't afraid to weaponize energy. I have two lights shining on me right now so that my face looks somewhat presentable for those of you that are watching us on YouTube. We take that for granted with how easy that is, but go look at the Ukraine where they have blackouts. Go look at Pakistan, where just this week, the week of January 23rd that we're recording this, where there's a blackout affecting most of the country in the year 2023. And so to me, as somebody that cares, yes, about the issue of having a clean energy future and a cleaner future and something that we can pass on a world to our children where it's okay for them to drink the water and breathe the air and they have a land to inhabit. It's very important to me. But it's also equally important to ensure the safety of our posterity. And one way we can do that is to ensure that America is leading whatever comes next in our energy future.
I love that. It is a very, very big world out there, and we should be leading by example.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Tyler, for joining us for the kickoff episode. And thank you all for listening to the Conservative Energy Podcast. This is brought to you by the Conservative Energy Network. To see more from our network, you can visit us online at www.conservativeenergynetwork.org. You can also find us on Twitter at ConsEnergyNet, on Facebook at Conservative Energy Network, and on YouTube at Conservative Energy Network. Thank you all, and I hope you join us next time.